attention. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. So here's the overview. I'm going to make a pitch that there's actually a very broad base of sciences of reading, not a single science of reading, and that if our instruction and student learning is informed by sciences of reading as opposed to a single science of reading, I think we're going to be doing a better job in fostering students' achievement and development, and hopefully contributing to students who want to become lifelong readers. I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of reading in just a few minutes, and then I'm going to overview what I consider to be three really important characteristics of successful readers, and characteristics that our most struggling readers really need to work on. Sometimes when our best efforts go off track, and those are metacognition, motivation, engagement, and self-efficacy. And I'm going to try to link how we might approach teaching or fostering these very important things within students in relation to these two old chestnuts of Matthew effects and zones of proximal development. And then everyone's favorite slide or two would be conclusions, which means I'll be finished talking, right? So Kathy mentioned this. There are actually two books that I'm drawing on. The first was published by Routledge, and this is a pretty heavy-duty research book. It's got over 25 chapters in it, and it's called The Handbook of Individual Differences in Reading. And in this book, I was able to cajole a lot of colleagues from across the decades and different fields into writing chapters about how they saw individual students differing in terms of their reading development. And while this is a really research-heavy book, it contributed to this book, which was released this year. And what I've tried to do is take the research stuff that showed up in that first book and bring it to classroom scenarios, while keeping in each of the chapters in the book a strong argument for why we should be doing things related to stuff like self-efficacy and motivation and engagement. Now, part of my argument is if we teach reading, we tend to just have this almost or always exclusive focus on cognitive strategies and skills. And the evidentiary base, the research base for doing so is, typically traces back to the National Reading Panel report, which then morphed into the Big Five of No Child Left Behind, and then is clearly related to research on the science, that's a singular, science of reading. And the learning outcomes that we expect if we're teaching reading tend to be two things: strategy development, whether it's using phonics strategically, or learning vocabulary, or comprehending text. And related to the strategy development, of course, is the point of reading, which is understanding texts. I want to point out that the National Reading Panel report is almost a quarter of a century old. And certainly most of the research that's cited in the National Reading Panel report is over a quarter of a century year old. And I would make this point also, that if you're part of a robust science, you would expect that in a quarter of a century, new knowledge has been contributed. Existing knowledge has been reinforced or challenged and revised or maintained. But also, and here's where I think it's really important that we pay attention to other sciences. What are the affiliated fields of reading development, and how can they inform our good instruction and student learning? So in contrast to teaching reading, here's what I see in teaching readers: that we don't lose the focus on cognitive strategies and skills, but we bring into the fold things like metacognition, motivation, engagement, and self-efficacy. We can add to that things like epistemic development, epistemic knowledge, and attributions that students make for their success or failure. But I'm limiting tonight's presentation to these three very powerful factors in the sake of finishing up in time. And it turns out the evidentiary base for teaching readers comes from this plural sciences of reading. And what we might expect as learning outcomes remain the idea of strategic and skillful readers, but also independent readers, motivators readers, readers with a strong belief in self, readers who can be critical and evaluative, and readers who learn from text. Now, I'm a big advocate of paying attention to the social context in which we try to teach, in which we try to get initiatives off the ground, in which we face challenges to the things that we believe, to the ways that we think children learn best. And to keep my education ongoing, I'm a member of a number of Facebook communities related to teaching reading, literacy teachers, and the science of reading. And I've grabbed two recent examples to help illustrate what I see as the difference between teaching readers and teaching reading. Now, here's the first one, where a member of this community said, I was just listening to the Science of Reading podcast, and they mentioned that there were about 17 micro skills of comprehension. Does anyone have a resource that lists them? And I am 100% certain that this posting and this question come from a teacher who is dedicated to students and who wants the best instruction to lead to the best learning outcomes. But when we talk about 17 micro skills of comprehension, and then the respondents to this question or this post are, well, I think you can find them here. I think you can find them there. Part of my concern is I've spent over 3 decades researching reading comprehension, and until this post, I wasn't clear on the fact that there were 17 micro skills of comprehension. The bigger point here is if we're so focused on the 5 pillars of reading development, and then the subdivisions with each of those pillars, we might lose the forest for the trees, which is children, of course, need strategies and skills, but they need more than that. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. This is another one, F&P, which I'm inferring means Fountain and Pinnell, barely touches on phonics, and their assessments combine decoding with comprehension so that you don't know where you are at. So many children have comprehension well beyond their decoding, so that an assessment like this is meaningless. I would rather test a child on a limited number of isolated words, one a list of 3-letter words and the other a list of high priority words that are not necessarily phonetic. And my concern with such a post here is that if you've got a kid who's comprehending well beyond their decoding, I'm a little bit concerned about why you just want to be focusing on isolated words and 3-lettered words and high priority words when you've already got evidence that comprehension is happening. And again, this is, how do you work out that balance between a focus on mechanics of reading and comprehension? But again, here these two examples are really focused on the nitty-gritty of skill and strategy instruction and how students learn from our skill and strategy instruction. And I'm going to I do contend that we need to pay attention to a lot of other things. And so one of my biggest concerns here is that, I can infer effort, compassion, and desire to help children. It's evident in these many postings that I go through on Facebook. But I believe it's only partially informed by what we know about how to help each and every student reader. And hopefully to help prove my point, I'm going to ask all of you to read a paragraph in just a few minutes. This is a paragraph that I grabbed in the basement of the SUNY Albany Library back in the early 1980s as I was trying to figure out what to do for my dissertation. And I wanted to have expert readers think out loud about the reading comprehension strategies that they were using. And so I found this paragraph, which tends to do a good job of de-automizing the things that we normally do automatically as good readers. And so what I want you to do when you see this paragraph, which will be the next slide, is try to construct meaning from it. That's the first task. The second task is try to keep track of what you are doing as you try to construct meaning. All right, so here's the first task, which is the paragraph. Read it, try to construct meaning, and then think about what strategies you're using as you try to construct meaning. Here you go. If you'd like to move on to your second sentence now, you can. I'm just kidding there, of course. Right, and I'm going to ask you to finish up in just like 30 seconds because most readers get to the point of diminishing returns for their cognitive effort at this point. And if you could again think about the strategies that you've been using as you try to construct meaning. All right, so if this was a standardized test, I'd say stop reading and now answer your multiple choice questions, but we won't go there. And I want you to focus on the next few slides because I've actually used this in many experiments and presentations, and I've literally asked thousands of accomplished readers to talk about strategies that they report. And I normally would ask people to volunteer those, but in the sake of time, given our time frame, I'm just going to put up on a couple of slides the strategies that people have reported using as they try to construct meaning. And I'm sure that you'll see yourself in this list of strategies. Here's what expert readers like yourselves have reported doing. They scan and skim the text to size up the task at hand. They note the text is from the discipline of anthropology or archaeology. They access relevant prior knowledge if available, which might mean you took Anthropology 101 way back in your freshman year in college. For some of you, probably not that far back, but for others like me, way back. You tried to make inferences. You assigned importance to particular words and phrases. You focused on vocabulary. Many people report focusing on horizon and broad point. Unfortunately, the horizon in this text is not what we typically associate with the sort of where land and sky or sea and sky meet, but it's more of a archaeological horizon. People report trying to visualize text contents. They use context to try to determine meanings of words. They parse the text into shorter, what they hope to be more manageable segments or chunks of text, and they paraphrase and translate sections of the text into more familiar terms, if possible. So if you see yourself in these last two slides, then you can definitely consider yourself in the ranks of an accomplished reader who has faced the task of reading a very difficult paragraph. Now, it turns out that there are other things that are reported in the research that I've done on expert reading strategies. Although I've never asked for metacognition, here are some of the things that people report related to their metacognition. They set a goal. It may be vague or precise for their reading. Once started, many people report slowing the rate of reading. Many people report rereading the text. Many people report adjusting the goal for reading, which is usually a downward adjustment. People report changing their reading strategies because they understand their comprehension is not really happening. And they evaluate near and far progress, which means they may evaluate how well they're doing in understanding a sentence or a part of a sentence, and then how well they're doing at the whole thing. Like, what's the main idea? What is this text about? So there you've got, I think, strong evidence that cognitive and metacognitive strategies are always front and center, very important for reading success. It turns out there are other things that are reported. For example, most people, when they do mention these things, talk about they're initially motivated and engaged because they say that this is a challenging text, but they believe in themselves as readers who can succeed. And it turns out that this initial high engagement gets sort of gets diminished as they go through the text and difficulty is encountered, and that there's growing frustration with an inability to understand the text. There's always annoyance with the guy asking you to do this task, which would be me. And once in a while, someone will report questioning their own reading ability. Other people have reported a diminished self-efficacy, saying things like, I guess I'm not as good a reader as I thought I was. And then others will talk about frustration because they can't really critically evaluate the text or judge how truthful the author is being. They can't determine the reliability or accuracy of the information in text. And people sometimes report conceding to the challenging text, but note that their degree of success is not really representative of their general reading ability. What I want to point out, especially in this last slide, is when we think about our struggling readers, um, might they be the folks who encounter such texts every day? You know, when a text is really difficult every day, which it is for our most struggling readers, it's not just about applying skills and strategies. It's somehow about summoning up even a bit of motivation. It's about convincing oneself of a level of self-efficacy that, yeah, maybe I might understand this text, even though in the past I've had a lot of trouble understanding most or all of the texts in this class. So I'm hoping that just checking out this paragraph teaches us a few things. And one is that really accomplished readers use a core of powerful reading comprehension strategies. Excuse me. And these reading comprehension strategies are pretty predictable. They're common across good readers. We know that prior knowledge and experience are necessary for constructing meaning. We know the metacognition's central for reading success. It helps us coordinate and monitor all of our efforts and strategies. And that strategic reading is accompanied by these phenomena that include motivation and engagement and self-efficacy. And it turns out that metacognition, motivation, engagement, self-efficacy are representatives of what I like to call the more broad sciences of reading. If we move forward or sideways, I would say, and focus only on cognitive strategies and skills, and I believe this is a real concern in some states and districts that I'm familiar with, where there's an exclusive focus on strategy and skill. We'll continue to teach reading, but if we incorporate instruction in classroom experiences that acknowledge the power and importance of metacognition, motivation, and engagement, and self-efficacy, then I believe we're in a good position to evolve to teach readers as opposed to teaching reading. And by the way, a broad point, which was really a focus of that difficult paragraph, is a type of Native American arrowhead. This is a picture that I got off Google Images. Now, sometimes when I think about, teaching my undergraduates who are learning to be elementary teachers, including elementary reading teachers, I come to this idea of rope versus caterpillar. And I'm sure many of, not all of you, are familiar with Scarborough's reading rope, which I think does a pretty decent job of portraying the strands of language ability, language knowledge that need to be brought together to ultimately to culminate in skilled reading. But I worry about the rope versus the caterpillar, and Eric Carle's done so many good things in terms of helping kids grow into reading and want to read. And I sometimes worry about, in balanced literacy, I think there's a rope and a caterpillar, but if it's not balanced, here's what's can happen. Like, I worry about, does the reading rope strangle the caterpillar? Coming up from the other direction, does the caterpillar eat the rope? Or does the rope guide the caterpillar? And if we want to get very, very synthetic and good natured about the whole thing, does the caterpillar incorporate the rope into building a cocoon, resulting in a beautiful new creature? So I think the rope and the caterpillar helped me think about the science of reading or the sciences of reading. I was giving I guess a vlog, video blog, right, on Mary Howard's wonderful little series. And after I gave my presentation, a participant sent me this sketch in where he took Scarborough's rope, but intertwined in the reading rope here would be motivation and engagement, self-efficacy, metacognition, and attributions. And I kind of like this. So I want to thank Matt Renwick, who I have not met, but who did this nice little diagram. Now, what I want to do next is go through these three areas of metacognition, motivation and engagement, and self-efficacy, and give you a little bit of sampling of the research behind each of them and what we might do in the classroom to foster these very powerful influences on reading. So let's start with metacognition. There's, I think, deserved and increased focus on metacognition as essential, not only in reading instruction, but in human learning and in school success. And it's got a lot of like related terms. You might have come across these terms: self-awareness, executive function, comprehension, monitoring, and mindfulness. And I associate all of these with the ability to understand connections between the many factors and mindsets that influence reading. So at the comprehension monitoring level, that was something you were just doing on that difficult paragraph, getting to the end of the sentence. Like, does that make sense? I better reread. That's really nice comprehension monitoring example. Executive function would be, how do I control my attention and how do I distribute my cognitive resources to help me through this? And I think at the highest levels, mindfulness helps readers understand that that reading contributes to their lives, and when they do, that can feed. Now, I'd like to just do a little bit of a background. I intentionally mixed up the citations here related to research because I wanted to remind or alert everyone to the fact that we have known about the power of metacognition for a really long time. And even before the term metacognition was coined or first used, and people started doing that in the 80s, Scott Paris back in 1986 determined that metacognition has a positive influence on reading comprehension. Borkowski and Turner call metacognition knowledge about cognition, awareness of one's own thinking processes, comprehension of requirements for learning, control of learning processes, and regulation of cognitive procedures. It's the mindful regulations of one's own learning processes. And then two of my colleagues at Maryland, John Guthrie and Alan Wigfield, talk about metacognitive students understand the relationship between their effort and reading outcomes, and this contributes to increased motivation and engagement. And I'm especially fond of this last quote because it's not only that metacognition is powerful, it's not only that motivation and engagement are powerful, but it turns out that they're related and they can have a sort of symbiotic relationship, which we'll get into in a little bit. Now, when we think about how do we teach reading, how do we teach readers related to metacognition, Wienman and his colleagues have three general goals that we should focus on when we're teaching readers. And that is use explicit teaching that focuses on the value of metacognition, situate metacognition instruction in authentic learning contexts, and then provide continual teaching and reinforcement of students' metacognitive mindsets and strategies. And it turns out that metacognitive reading strategies are really close cousins to cognitive reading strategies, and they're amenable to things that we know are successful when we want to teach reading comprehension strategies. These include teacher behaviors that include modeling, explaining, and thinking aloud. And I'm a big fan of checklists. This is something that I've used in the 2 university reading clinics that I've worked in. If you look at the first 2 questions, excuse me, on this mini checklist, it's important that students learn to ask a question like, does that make sense? And do I understand? And if you've worked in a reading clinic or if you've worked with struggling readers, you know that these are key sentences. It's one thing to learn to ask them. It's another thing, closely related, to be able to answer them accurately. But once students ask these questions and start going about trying to answer them, we've really planted the seed of metacognition. And as students develop metacognitive strategies, we can add to things that might be first introduced in checklist form, like these following questions. Is there a problem with my understanding? What's the problem? Can I fix it? How can I fix it? Did I fix it? Can I get back on track? And so you can imagine these as classroom posters, a laminated bookmark that kids have on the side of the text that they're reading, as very helpful. And I believe that over time, human beings have a really good skill, which is they can internalize a checklist which was initially external. And here's just another example of how you can elaborate and continue to build on what was once a very fundamental checklist. And a colleague of mine, David Whitebread, over in the UK, I think, put it really well when he said, the aim of good teachers should, of course, be to make themselves redundant. If we're to properly educate others, we must enable them to become independent learners. And just to wrap this little mini section on metacognition, if we've done our best teaching all 5 of the No Child Left Behind strategy and skill pantheon, but we ignore metacognition, there's a very high chance that our students will be strategic and skillful, but they won't be independent. You have to be metacognitive to be a successful, independent reader and learner. So the second of the 3 very powerful factors I want to focus on is motivation and engagement. And I'd say any teachers worth their salt, of course, have known the power of motivation and engagement, and the obstacle of lack of motivation and engagement presents to our teaching and to our students' development. So let's look at the research. It turns out that reading engagement is the joint functioning of motivational processes and cognitive strategies during reading. And I love that portrayal. If you could imagine, I'm motivated and I've got these strategies, and when I bring them together, I'm an engaged reader. It means I'm processing, I'm being strategic, I'm being skillful, but this motivation has melded with these strategies and skills to help me be engaged. And then Pat Alexandra puts it this way, that reading competence can be achieved through co-development of knowledge of reading and text processing skills and strategies, and personal commitment and motivation. And all of those teachers who have been in the classroom know that this personal commitment and motivation is one of those things that really separates our struggling readers from accomplished readers, and developing readers from voracious readers. A few more things on motivation and engagement. PISA, which is the International Assessment of Reading, it's the one where Singapore and Finland always do really well, and Americans are sort of in the middle of the pack. They put it this way: engagement in reading can be a consequence as well as a cause of higher reading skill, but the evidence suggests that these 2 factors are mutually reinforcing, meaning you can be motivated to read something, and once you start reading it, you can be further motivated or less motivated depending on how that reading is going with the content and how well you're doing. And then Jim Cummins back in 2015 said the negative effects of socioeconomic disadvantage can be pushed back in schools and classrooms where students have access to a rich print environment and become actively engaged with literacy. And I don't think we can, that's just such a wonderful quote, because it helps me think that what we do in the classroom with our students and their reading can start to make a dent in what are really big socioeconomic disadvantages that exist in almost all school districts in the United States. So a profile of motivated and engaged readers demonstrates they choose to read for a variety of purposes and comprehend texts in the context of the situation. They persevere when reading is challenging. They elect a wide range of literacy activities for a number of purposes: aesthetic enjoyment, knowledge gain, and interactions with others. And they read for their own motivations, which further activate self-regulation of higher order reading strategies. So that's another example of how motivation and engagement sort of cue metacognition. Very important factor. Now this, I just want to let all of you know, this is the extent of my ability to design using tiles and drawing things in PowerPoint. But, motivation and engagement are present before, during, and after reading. And when our students have a history of not doing well in reading, then when we think about motivation before reading, it tends to be low. Um, During reading, our motivation can maintain, it can decrease, or can increase, based on the interestingness of the text, based on the ongoing success or lack of success that we're having with reading. And then our memory of an event, of a reading event, further influences future reading events. So if we've done really well in reading after reading in school, it's not surprising that we're motivated to go back to reading, because human beings like to go back to things that they're successful at. If our memory of reading events in class is skewed to the negative, that I haven't been very successful, then we know how that will influence future approaches to reading, and that means students will be undermotivated or not motivated. When we're teaching readers, it turns out that research tells us that if we help students set learning goals, as well as goals for performance that are appropriately challenging, that feeds student readers' motivation. If the learning experiences are ones that students value, they can't help but be motivated. And as we work with students to teach them strategy and skill and to foster things like metacognition and motivation and engagement, helping support those students' sense of control and autonomy turns out to be very important. Further, when we teach readers related to motivation and engagement, helping them develop a sense of competency and helping them recognize, monitor, and strategize about their reading progress is very important. Um, Asking students to use what they learn in meaningful tasks is also important. Remember that school is that special place where we ask students what they learned from reading, and life is where, more often than not, we are asked to use what we learned from reading. So the more we get to that second scenario, what can you do with what you've learned? That should have a sort of backwards effect on motivation and engagement and be very positive for students. And then, of course, having an emotionally supportive and non-threatening learning environment not only pays dividends for motivation and engagement, but for a student's well-being in general. The third of the three powerful factors I want to focus on this evening is self-efficacy. And I believe that this gets so under-recognized. I'm on a campaign for people to recognize the power of self-efficacy. I hope the next few slides help you with this idea. So Albert Bandura is sometimes considered the godfather of self-efficacy. And I'd love for you to just read this statement to yourself. So take a moment to do that. All right, so I'm guessing that I thought the second sentence was really important because I changed the font and I changed the color of the font. But I want to read that. Unless people believe they can produce desired effects by their actions, they have little incentive to act or to persevere in the face of difficulties. So if you take that sentence and you think about the struggling readers that you work with or that you have worked with, I think the power of self-efficacy just jumps up right in your face. When we're all adults, I'm guessing there's no kids listening to this presentation unless their parents think they have sleeping problems and they want them to go to sleep listening to me. But we as adults, have you ever been in a, like, if you play tennis or golf or something, and you realize, boy, I'm in over my head. You can just like tough it out through a set or a match, and then never do it again with those folks. Because adults often, like, they earn the ability to opt out of things they know they're not going to do well at. But our students don't have that luxury. They shouldn't have that luxury, but they don't have that luxury, and it's really telling when we think about a child who doesn't believe in himself or herself or their self, to enter into school every day thinking that they won't succeed. That's got to be such a burden on top of having to learn whatever skills and strategies remain in their unfinished kit. Let's look at some of the research, which here, this research goes back almost 30 years. We know that students with low self-efficacy have diminished motivation to read. They have lower self-regulation or metacognition. They're really good at task avoidance, which should not be surprising. Task avoidance can sometimes spill over into disruptiveness. We know that. And we know that from research that high self-efficacy operates in different directions. So with high self-efficacy, students have increased motivation to read. They have increased self-regulation and metacognition, and they don't avoid tasks because they believe that they'll succeed. It turns out the literature, the research literature on self-efficacy is pretty clear about what we should do when we're teaching readers. Um, we've all heard this term, nothing succeeds like success, and with self-efficacy, nothing could be more true. What this means for our students and for instruction is that it's imperative that students succeed at something every day. And, it's the masterful teacher who can figure out how to address that individual difference in every student and not seem like baby play, like make it seem like you really have made an accomplishment. And that's where I think our attention to individualized differences in student readers really pays off. In addition to providing mastery experiences, nothing succeeds like success. Teachers can model what it looks like to work for and then attain a goal, and then to share joy and enthusiasm as you do that. And just as we model strategies for students, we can model these things. Um, Next, supportive and directive feedback is really important. So something like "good job" is always appreciated by students, but they need more than that to help build self-efficacy. So if we can be supportive and directive, like, "I really appreciate how much effort you gave there, and do you see how your attention to how that word is spelled and how you pronounced it?" Or, "I see how your attention to using that." Let's pick out um, a compare and contrast strategy in reading. That directive feedback helps students connect what they've accomplished to these good things that build self-efficacy. So we could say that unless people believe they can produce desired effects by their actions, they have little incentive to act or persevere in the face of difficulties. Again, just think of your struggling readers in relation to that statement. Now, it turns out, like, if these are really valuable, we really must have a way to assess the success of our teaching and students' growth in each of these areas. So here are a couple of some recent, some not so recent questionnaires, scales, and other types of evaluations and assessments that help us know how well our instruction's going and how well students are developing in these areas. And you don't need to scribble these down. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I'll be happy to email these slides to you at the end of the presentation. I believe I have my email. If not, I'll give it to you then. Right. Now, as we're entering the home stretch, which would be the last 15 minutes of this presentation, I want to visit the idea of the Matthew effect, which is, I think, a very powerful idea related to accomplished and struggling student readers. This goes back to the 1980s, where Keith Stanovich was investigating the phenomena of elementary school students who just took off as readers, the ones who are just growing exponentially, right? So and he compared them with students who are struggling. And what he wrote was readers of differing skills soon diverge in the amount of practice they receive at reading and writing activities. They also have different histories of success, failure, and reward in the context of academic tasks. The long-term effects of such differing histories could act to create other cognitive and behavioral differences between readers of varying skill, right? So even back in the mid-80s, Keith Stanovich was thinking about what is it that makes such a difference? How do some readers grow so quickly and so firmly in their reading ability, and while others struggle? And he started to create these ideas of sort of reciprocity. And the Matthew effect, which he termed he sort of came up with this term in reading. He found a reciprocal relationship between vocabulary knowledge and reading comprehension that resulted in exponential growth of students' reading achievement. And I want to propose that it's not just the reading skill and strategy. In this case, he looked at vocabulary and reading comprehension. But what if we substituted things like motivation and engagement, self-efficacy and metacognition in the above statement to determine influences and reciprocal relationships? And if we do that, I think we find the Matthew effects an appropriate metaphor to use in examining student development in addition to and in relation to the cognitive skills and strategies. So I've mentioned this just a couple of times, but if we look at this diagram, so the tile on the left in the middle represents reading strategies and skills and their development within students. And we take the three things that I've briefly overviewed this evening: metacognition, self-efficacy, motivation, and engagement. Um, I think it would be foolish for me to, suggest, why don't you just go back to wherever you go to teach kids and, think about adding a metacognition theme and a self-efficacy theme and a motivation engagement theme to your teaching if they're not already there. But it turns out that they have a symbiotic relationship. And so if you look at motivation and engagement, for example, it's connected to self-efficacy because as students grow to believe in themselves as readers, they become more and more motivated and engaged as readers. When students are more metacognitive, they better understand the relationship between their motivation and engagement and self-efficacy. And all of these can contribute to increased amounts of reading. And we know that increased amounts of reading contribute to continuing reading strategy development. So it's not that we have to aim at all of these individually and hope that each works on its own. It's that in our very best student readers and in our adult reading, all of these are working continuously and to the benefit of one another. Now, I'd like to go, I think, to the dark side here for a moment, but imagine a reverse Matthew effect where you have low self-efficacy, low motivation, little or no metacognition. And when I think about let's take a struggling 10-year-old reader who may have spent kindergarten, first, second, third, maybe part of fourth grade, which would equal one half of their lives with poor reader experiences. Should we be surprised that self-efficacy is absent or that motivation and engagement are low or missing, or that metacognition is something that the student has determined, why would I want to do that? We know that struggling readers' theories of self and the attributions that they make for their performance can be wildly inaccurate, but they are powerful. And so if we think about the reverse Matthew effect, I end up asking this question: does all high quality instruction in the world matter to the students who is convinced that he, she, or they may not achieve? And so to bring these things back to the consideration of science of reading and sciences of reading, Do we have a balance like this in our classrooms? We might see in the right-hand column word recognition, fluency, vocabulary comprehension, but are we complementing that with a focus on motivation and engagement, self-efficacy, metacognition, and perhaps attributions for performance? And then the second old chestnut after Matthew effect would be zones of proximal development. I'm sure most, if not all of you, are familiar with the idea that our best instruction is really that instruction which meets kids at their current level of accomplishment or capability, and that urges them, encourages them to move to the next step of competence or capability. And we typically frame zones of proximal development in relation to strategy and skill development. But I'd ask you to think about, could we think about zones of proximal development in terms of students developing positive attitudes towards reading, in terms of students believing in themselves in a very positive and empowering way? And can we think about zones of proximal development related to motivations that feed engagement? So how I normally work with zones of proximal development with my undergraduate students is, let's think about the space. At the bottom here, we've got our understanding of students' current level of growth and achievement, which, by the way, that understanding is so dependent on our teachers' ability to do regular classroom-based assessments. They tell us where that level is. And then we work through strategy and skill modeling, think aloud, explaining, and we hope that perhaps through the gradual release of responsibility, that students grow to their next level of growth and achievement. And we know that moving through the zones of proximal development is usually accomplished by teachers doing scaffolding, explaining, modeling, supporting, and thinking out loud. And so I'd love to challenge you to think about, what are the ways that we can go about figuring out where students are metacognitively? How self-efficacious are students, and how motivated and how engaged are students? And then what can we do as part of our reading instruction to teach readers in that fully embraces this sciences of reading, and so that not only our strategy and skill develop, but these very powerful accompanying factors are also accounted for. Right, so I think I said earlier, these are everyone's favorite slides. Um, and basically those three areas we went through, metacognition, motivation, engagement, and self-efficacy, there are chapters in the book that Kathy held up at the beginning of this presentation. And there are also chapters on students' attributions, and there's a chapter on the development of students' epistemic knowledge. Again, I didn't include slides on those, just in relation to our time frame for this evening. But let's conclude this way. I would make the claim, and I hope that I've provided sufficient evidence, that we really should focus on teaching readers and avoid teaching reading. And I'd like to claim that teaching readers allows us to draw from the broad sciences of reading, moving beyond strategy and skill instruction to focus also. And I want to emphasize that, to focus also. It's not at all about moving from strategy and skill instruction. It's about maintaining that, but adding to it the idea of and the importance of metacognition, motivation and engagement, self-efficacy, and other influential factors. And I would also claim that while cognitive skill and strategy are requisite for reading development and success, they do not account for all that must be working for students to succeed. And finally, while my presentation focused on reading and teaching readers, the influence of motivation and engagement, metacognition, and self-efficacy are, of course, school-wide and lifelong. So what we do in our reading classroom or reading period really maintains across a child's and adolescent's and adults' learning and life experiences. Right, so there's that says thank you. I know you all can read that. And that's my email. And if you would like to request a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, just email me and I'll do my best to get it back to you quickly. just in the content box, say PowerPoint request or WSRA request, right? So as Kathy mentioned, I'll be back next week if any of you can stand it. If any of you have any questions or concerns about my presentation, or if any of you have just any follow-up, follow-through that you'd like to discuss with me, I'll be on air for an hour next week, and Kathy will let you know about that day and time. So thank you again. I hope you had a good dinner, and especially if you are off camera, and maybe a glass of wine. I'm gearing up to do that as soon as we finish here tonight. So thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, Peter. Oh my word. I'm wondering if your head is swimming like mine. And so therefore, as you go and you are thinking about what you will do differently or how you might think differently in the next week, please rejoin us. You do not have to re-register for next Thursday. You will be sent a link for next Thursday, same time, same place, same station. And I think it's a great opportunity. We know that just attending a webinar or a presentation doesn't change our practices necessarily, but that support is very important. And so WSRA and the Milwaukee Area Reading Council, Central Wisconsin Northeast Reading Councils, were really thinking about how can we provide ongoing support and networking together so that we really can successfully meet the needs of all of our students. And I just wanted to make one more comment. And again, here is Peter's book where he really goes in depth into all the ideas and ways of thinking about helping all of our readers. So this is very valuable. But in addition, you may not know that Peter Afflerbach was actually Dr. Peter Johnston's first doc student. And if you know Peter Johnston's work, you can see how this is so linked, and that Peter Johnston's work on how our language is a strategy that we can use to help accomplish some of the things that Peter is talking about, in addition to all the wonderful things. So this has just been amazing. I hope you can see where literacy is complex and that the sciences expand how we as expert educators can better meet the needs of all of our students. So with that, I want to thank you, Peter. And I think you could
my pleasure.
I think you could get a sense for what a just good guy he is. He donated his time. I think it's important for you to know that, so we could offer this free for everyone that was interested in, which speaks volumes about his dedication. So we hope to see you all again next week. Thank you so much for coming, and have that glass of wine or that dinner that you gave up for a while, or tuck your kids into bed. So thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.